The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher is produced in the first instance as a radio show, and it's aired on stations around Australia. Due to music licensing restrictions, copyright-protected music tracks in this podcast edition have either been replaced with royalty-free alternatives or removed entirely.
The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome back to the show. Great to have you with us. Clearsignal.com.au is the website, and of course, shoot me an email anytime you like, steve@clearsignal.com.au. Well, we've got a huge show coming up this week, and, it might even be seen in some places to be controversial, but that's okay. It's all right to have great discussion. Coming up a bit later in the show, tell me how you going getting rid of your COVID kilos. I can tell you, I'm not having a lot of luck. Actually, it's something I've really struggled with. Like many people, I think, during the lockdowns, particularly if you were in the part of the world from which I hail. A lot of us are stacked on a heap of weight during that time. Well, we're going to be talking to Hobart-based fitness instructor Josh Wood a little later in the show, and looking at just some strategies that might just help us get a little bit more motivated to improve our health and fitness and, get that back on track if that's something you're looking to do. That's coming up a little later. But speaking of the COVID times, now, how did you find that? I wonder, back in those times, they were really, really stressful for a lot of people. All around Australia, we had lockdowns and we had border closures. If you were here in Victoria, though, from where I present this show, well, I can tell you it was a nightmare, and particularly not only Victoria, but more specifically Melbourne. It was a really, really interesting time, but it also brought people down on a couple of different sides. You were either really in favour of what was going on, or you were perhaps really questioning it and perhaps feeling a little bit disempowered. And I make no bones about the fact that I was one of those in the latter category. I really just was deeply concerned at the way that was all handled, and I just think it could have been done so much better, and we could have got around it in a far more mature way and perhaps somewhat less dystopian, let's just say. One of the things that was really interesting at that time was that people who thought perhaps that freedom was important were not only were they ignored, and particularly in the media, and particularly I might say from some people who I might have once held up as respected journalists, they were really denigrated within media and around government and all of the social media stuff that went on at that time. And I really think if we'd been a bit more mature about it, we could have actually had some interesting discussions around that time, around our freedoms, and perhaps, as I say, how could we have handled this a little bit better? Somebody who perhaps unwillingly at the outset found himself at the forefront of that movement was a gentleman by the name of Topher Field. He's better known to us as Topher Field. And Topher actually has become someone who is synonymous with the anti-lockdown movement, particularly here in Melbourne. And he was certainly someone who should have gotten more airtime than I think he certainly did at that time. He's very active in media. He's very active in social media. And he's also presented a documentary on that time, certainly taken from the protesters' side of view, called Battleground Melbourne. And I think you'd do yourself really well if you really want a snapshot of what it was like living here at that time. Well, that's a story that I don't think really many other people have told. He's joining us on the line now for a discussion about this and a few other things. Topher Field, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
Topher, the first time I became aware of your work was back in the early days of the pandemic lockdowns here in Victoria, and a small town outside of Melbourne, it's about 120 kilometres to the east of Melbourne, called Trafalgar. And you'd gone down there to make a speech about freedoms, and I wonder if you really realised at that point where we were headed with this and what it would mean for you personally.
I knew it was significant. That was the first time in my life that I walked out my door with the intention of doing something illegal. And for those that are listening and don't have the video, I'm putting illegal into air quotes because I don't think the rules that banned protest were legal rules in the first place. But for the purposes of enforcement, for the purposes of police and how they were going to respond, I was walking out my door to do something illegal. And up to that point in time, I was raised in a good Christian conservative home. I was a goody two-shoes to a fault. So I understood that what I did that day was going to be very significant, that it was going to be, at least in terms of its impact on my life, there was very much a before and after. And that day was the day when I stepped into whatever this new after was going to be. What, of course, none of us knew was just how mad the situation was going to get, that it was going to drag on into 18 months. It was going to lead to rubber bullets being fired on unarmed protesters. It was going to lead to the point where we had a ring of steel and military set of checkpoints around our city where you had to show your papers, please, if you wanted to go in or out. None of us knew that we were going to have a curfew that was going to be enforced with the use of live ammunition in one particular case where a person trying to evade being caught outside of curfew hours jumped in his car and drove recklessly and wasn't trying to hit a police officer but was driving recklessly near a police officer, and that police officer opened fire on that driver. None of us knew that we were going to get to this sort of madness. And so in that sense, really I was just sort of stepping out and doing what I knew to be right, what I believed I had to do. I'm not the sort of person who can just be silent and say, oh, well, someone else should do that. Well, no, if I'm saying someone should do something, then what I'm saying is I should do something, and that's what I did. And it's led me into some amazing places. It's led me into the darkest chapters of my life, and I've been clawing my way out of that over the last couple of years. And it's led me now into some of the most wonderful opportunities. And I would say my life is much better and is very much enriched because of what I did. But boy, there was a journey to get through that.
It was such a journey for so many people in this state, I think, and it was quite dystopian as you talk about there. It's also been very polarizing. People come down on one side of this debate or the other. I think there was kind of a really silent majority of people, or perhaps a silent movement of people in this town that were like, you know what, this is wrong, but I'm too scared to speak out. But for those who were a believer in what was going on, people such as yourself were really made out to be in the media and in political circles to be public enemy number one. I mean, that must have taken quite an impact on you personally.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I sort of say that I've been through some fairly dark times, and that's, I'm talking about mental health and that sort of stuff, as well as physical to a certain degree. But the techniques used by Daniel Andrews that were then mimicked in the media were classic techniques, but he executed them so well. He held over 120 daily press conferences in a row before he took a break, and he played the victim through all of this. He was like, oh, I'm sacrificing for you. Look at how hard I'm working. I'm on your TV every single day because I want you to know that I'm in charge and I'm leading and blah, blah, blah. And these press conferences could have been a 5-line email. There was nothing of substance in these press conferences. And what he would do is very, very clever. He would minutely adjust the rules on a very, very regular basis so that you couldn't...
Oh, it was crazy. Yeah.
You couldn't not watch. If you failed to watch, then you'd get caught out not knowing what the latest adjustment to the rules were. And when I talk about minute adjustments, I mean, it got silly. At one point, we weren't in hard lockdowns at this point, and we were allowed to visit friends and meet with friends in a park. We couldn't go to each other's houses yet, but we could go to a park and have a picnic. Of course, a picnic, people want to have a barbecue, they want to have a beer, that sort of thing. And they adjusted the rules as to whether or not you were allowed to lower your mask in order to drink an alcoholic beverage or not. These were the sorts of minute, as if the drink being alcoholic made some difference to its level of danger from the coronavirus's point of view. But these minute adjustments were done with a completely straight face and in complete seriousness, as though this was every single minute adjustment was life or death. So what he did was he created a culture where millions of Melburnians were waking up every single day, either working from home or not allowed to leave home, or just sitting there on the government sit-down money that they were paying, a couple of $100 a week for people to just sit down, shut up, and don't cause trouble. And all they'd have to do is go wandering out in their pajamas, make themselves a coffee at home, and then turn on the TV at 11 o'clock. And what they would hear is their dear leader, their premier, telling them what wonderful people they are because they're saving grandma, and they are frontline soldiers in this war against this once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. Staying home staying home saves lives. Staying apart keeps us together. All of this language was very deliberate. It was very, very intentional, and it was very carefully designed. And we now know that he spent millions of dollars of taxpayers' money on consultants helping him to design his language around the coronavirus. So the psychology of this is fascinating, and he did very much create an us and a them. And people like me were demonized. People like me were, irresponsible, possibly neo-Nazis. I mean, there was all sorts of nonsense in the press. And that was very, very deliberate, because if you want to start a cult, basically, a cult is defined by two things. It's defined by who is in it, but actually more importantly, it's defined by who's not. And so you have to have an enemy. And so he was creating this cult of personality around himself. That requires an enemy. And people like myself were the convenient enemy that he chose.
You sure were, and it was really interesting. The protests, as they went on over time, became bigger. It was interesting. One of the things I noticed in the media, particularly from some journalists who I had kind of thought might have actually been a little bit more objective, but turned out not to be. And they would say there'd be a couple of hundred people when there were clearly thousands.
Yeah.
I want to play a quick grab to you, Topher, from a speech you made at probably the biggest one here.
Daniel Andrews, look at me. Look at me. Look at us. We are the captain now. 10% of this city showed up in this park today.
I would really encourage people to go onto YouTube, Topher, and really take a listen to that. If you want to talk about passion and a commitment to a cause and commitment to preserving our freedoms, that still stirs me, that speech. I was actually listening to it this morning, taking some grabs from it, and that was an amazing speech. But there were hundreds of thousands of people by this point. I think it should be pointed out too that at that point they were looking at changing the laws around the Pandemic Management Act, it was called, and we were trying to stop that. I think ultimately that was a fight that was unsuccessful in the end, but that speech was inspiring.
Well, thank you. And I consider that to be the greatest day of my life. That was one of the most incredible moments because, for a lot of people, they say, oh, I was there from the very beginning. And I say, oh, fantastic. Like, when was that? And they'll talk about late 2020 or even early 2021. And they kind of think that's when the movement started. They think it started when Zoe Buhler was arrested or it started with these various events. No, it didn't. It started on April 25th, 2020 at that Trafalgar protest that you mentioned at the beginning. And I was there from that moment all the way through. And what people don't realize is the risk and sacrifice taken and made by those of us who kept that movement alive before everybody else showed up. And it wasn't just me. It was people like Morgan Jonas, Monica Smith, Nick Patterson, and many, many others whose names I'm not going to remember. But we were a very small club. And we were showing up to protests, and there might be dozens of us, there might be a few hundred of us. People were so afraid they were not showing up yet. And we could see what was coming. We could see the suffering that was going to be caused by these rules. But so many people weren't going to risk coming out until they felt the suffering. It wasn't until it really affected them that they were going to hit the streets. And so we were alone for a very long time, and we were taking enormous risks. Police were kicking down people's doors and making violent arrests, hospitalizing people in their own homes, as they were violently arrested for daring to make a Facebook post, for daring to say, hey, this isn't right, we should be protesting. And it was only on the back of that finally, when Zoe Buhler was arrested and that went viral, that we had a few thousand people show up for the first time. And that was in late 2020. That was already 6-7 months in to the journey at that point. So many arrests had already happened. So many people had already been hospitalized. So much oppression had already taken place by that point. And then, of course, it was another full year from that moment until we got to the moment where that speech happened. I think that was the 20th of November 2021, I think was the date of that particular event. And that is, to this day, the greatest day of my life. And I've said that to my wife. It's okay. I'm a married man, and I can tell you, my wife was right next to me that day, and she actually agrees. It was an incredible moment because everything that we had been dreaming of for 18 months, everything that we had been hoping for, came true that day. And finally we saw the numbers that we'd always hoped for. And this is real life. This isn't Hollywood. There's no guarantee that there was ever going to be a Hollywood ending. There was no guarantee that day would ever come, let alone that I'd be around to see it. And I was there, and I wasn't just there to see it, but they actually asked me to speak, and I got to give that speech. So that for me is one of the greatest days of my life. And if that proves to be the greatest speech that I ever give in my life, well, I'd still consider that to be a worthy accomplishment.
I'm speaking with Libertarian and political commentator Topher Field. Topher, we talk about that Pandemic Management Act, and I'll just touch on this briefly before we move on to some other topics. But interestingly, the opposition here in Victoria touted a policy going into the last election about, revoking that, but they seemed to go very quiet on that during the election. Matthew Guy all of a sudden stopped talking about that. Why do you think that was?
Oh, well, this is classic. This is exactly how the uniparty works. They pretend to be opposed to each other, and they'll fight tooth and nail when they don't have the numbers and they know they can't stop it from happening anyway. And then once it's law, they sit there and what they actually want is to have that power. That's actually what they care about more than giving the power back to the people. You got to understand that from the Labor and Liberal Party perspective, they brag about the fact, oh, well, we are the parties of government. So really all these other minor parties are irrelevant. You should ignore those. You should be, throwing your lot in with one of the parties of government. And there's some logic to that, but there's a perverse logic behind it as well, which is that they know that whatever laws the other side pass, sooner or later, they will have control over it. They will be still on the books. That'll be the law when they have power. And so if you actually look at it throughout history, it's extremely rare for one party to repeal a law that they opposed when they were in opposition when they get into government. They'll oppose it when they're in opposition. They'll speak out against it. They'll denounce it in the strongest possible terms. And then they get power, which means they have the numbers. They could repeal this thing and they don't ever bother. And there's a very good reason for that, because they don't actually believe in freedom. This is one of the misconceptions about conservatism. Certainly progressivism and sort of socialism, we know, is a philosophy of control. It says we should have the power to tell you how to live. What people don't realize about conservatism, and I say this as someone who was raised as a conservative, and I still make very conservative choices for myself, but actually the underlying philosophy of conservatism is the same. We, the government, should have the power to tell you how you should live. They just have a different view on how you should live and which areas of your life they should control. But fundamentally, conservatism and progressivism share this in common. They believe that the government should have the power to tell you how to live. And I went on a journey 20 years ago. The army is actually what started this journey for me, sort of seeing behind the curtain, seeing inside this organization that as a conservative I venerated, I revered, and seeing the reality of it and how human it was and how flawed and how broken in so many ways. And that began a journey for me out of conservatism to actually saying, no, the government doesn't have the right to tell me or you or anybody else how to live unless we're hurting other people. At that point, yes, okay, we need someone to get involved. But as long as you're not hurting other people, the government has no right. And unfortunately, neither of our uniparty, parties of government share that view. They both think that they have the right to tell each and every one of us how to live. And that's why they don't repeal the laws that the others passed, even if they opposed them at the time.
I'll tell you what, though, I've always found that a very flawed strategy for Matthew Guy. Had he gone there and said, if he had really been a conviction politician and maybe abandoned the principle of which you just spoke and actually said, you know what, we're going to preserve your freedom, I think he might have come a lot closer than he did to winning government. But anyway, that's all been done and dusted now. But that does bring us to a different approach to politics these days, and something that I think a lot of people might have been awakened to during that time, and that's libertarianism. Sure. Now, you've been someone who's spoken about libertarianism for many, many years. Can you explain to our audience what the concept of that is versus the left and right paradigm that we were just talking about before?
Yeah, sure. Essentially, it puts the shoe on the other foot. It makes a different assumption. The assumption of conservatism and progressivism is that you can have a small group of elite people in government, in power, who can make decisions for everybody, on behalf of everyone. And that's what leads to the best outcomes. Libertarianism says, well, no, you know your situation best. And not only do you know your situation, you know your priorities, what you like, what you dislike, what you care about, and what you want in your life. And that makes you the person most qualified to make decisions about your life. And for as long as you're not hurting anybody else, then it's really nobody else's business whether we think your decisions are good or bad decisions. And now if someone's running around being an axe murderer or something like that, well, yes, of course, that's a different matter. If someone's taking drugs to the point that they're now running out and committing crimes to fund their drug habit, well, now that's a problem that needs to be dealt with. This isn't licentiousness. This isn't a license to do whatever you want and hurt people. This is a recognition that actually someone in an ivory tower, a career politician, cannot possibly understand the priorities of a sole trader, artist or builder, or, someone who's running a large company, small company, a school teacher. These people cannot possibly make decisions on behalf of those people and claim that they understand what it is that those people want. They live in a different world. They live in a different universe. And so as much as possible, decisions should be made by the people that are affected by those decisions, because they're the people that have, one, the most information, because they understand their own individual circumstances, and two, the most skin in the game. There's nothing worse than having politicians in Canberra on six-figure salaries making decisions that won't hurt them at all because they're wealthy and they're powerful and they're well-connected, but are absolutely devastating to other people in society. That's the wrong way to be making decisions. Now, one of the objections that people have for libertarianism is, but people can't be trusted. We can't trust people with power over their own lives. Well, let's play with that for a second. It's probably the most common objection that I hear. And my response to that is, if people can't be trusted with power over their own lives, then what makes you think that anyone can be trusted with power over other people's lives? Because that's the alternative.
Precisely.
If we say, you can't be trusted with power over your life, we need some politicians in Canberra to make those decisions for you. Well, how come they can be trusted? And by what method did we select those people who magically can be trusted when the average person can't? I mean, in a democratic system, these average people who can't be trusted are the people who are picking these magic people who supposedly can be trusted. Like, nothing about this makes sense. The minute you say people can't be trusted with power over their own lives, you tie yourself in knots. There is no logical route to get from that premise to the situation that we have today. It's absurd to think that a democratically elected system like what we have today could possibly work if that premise is true. And so I put it to you that no one really actually believes that premise. They just use that and say, people can't be trusted. Some people will hurt themselves. Yes, they will. But a lot less people will get hurt by others. And by others, I mean politicians and bureaucrats in Canberra. And that is a trade-off that is worth making.
Yeah, and it's talking about the old adage about personal responsibility too. If you wish to do something that's injurious to your health, for example, well, that's really your business, I suppose, as long as you're not doing it to, affecting anybody else. And particularly, when that becomes more broadly based around politics within this nation, I think that becomes more and more important. And I would hope that a lot of people perhaps have learned that lesson out of what we saw through the COVID times, where we really had Big Brother telling us what was good for us, and nobody shall question that, which I just find disturbing. And I mean, I know I'll probably get a lot of hate mail. People can email me if they like, but that's just my personal view on it. And I became quite passionate about that. Two politicians we saw here in Victoria that were prepared to stand up against what was going on here, quite bravely, I thought, were Tim Quilty and David Limbrick. Yeah. And those two guys were from what was then the Liberal Democrats, but is now the Libertarian Party. I think those two demonstrated that you don't have to toe the line. You can stand for principle as a politician if you so choose.
I also want to give an honourable mention to Catherine Cumming MP. She was a third one who stood with them in a lot of different ways and showed a tremendous amount of courage. Unfortunately, the only one to get re-elected was David Limbrick, and this illustrates a real challenge that minor party politics has and that libertarianism has. And that is communicating these values and communicating that this is actually a better way for us to govern. This is a better way for us to live, is very, very challenging, because the siren song of a politician saying, I can fix that for you, is very appealing to most people. The politician saying, I'm going to spend money on that problem. I've got a plan. That's a very appealing thing for the average punter to hear. Someone else is going to fix, I don't have to worry about this anymore. And the message of a libertarian is, you can take responsibility for yourself. I'll get the government out of the way so that you can decide what's best for you. And that requires a different kind of person. The reality is we get the government we deserve, and that's not a good thing. And so if we want better government, we have to start by becoming better people. And that begins with accepting that we're actually responsible for ourselves, and that we ought to make these decisions for ourselves, and we ought to be responsible for the consequences. And if we make a bad decision and we end up enduring bad consequences, we then have to figure out how to deal with that and how to come back from that. It's nobody else's responsibility but our own. And now, I believe in charity. I don't believe that anyone should be malnourished in this country. No one should be unsheltered in this country. No one should be unclothed in this country, and that there should be opportunity for everyone. I don't think the government is the best body by which to provide all of that. So I'm not suggesting that when someone makes a mistake and ends up, let's say, bankrupt, that no one should go anywhere near them and help them and get alongside them and, give them somewhere to stay and something to eat and make sure their family are looked after. Absolutely, we should do that. Sure. As a society, as a group of free individuals making those choices ourselves. We should absolutely do that. But the government's not the best body to do that. And this sort of message, I mean, so many people would react even to me implying that welfare is not necessarily, government welfare, that is not necessarily a good thing. So many people would be like, oh, you can't say that. So many people would suffer. Well, okay, if we removed all government welfare instantaneously without allowing time for the private sector and for charity and philanthropy to take that place, well, then yes, that would be true. But actually, it's entirely possible for philanthropy to meet a lot of these needs. We've got to change the incentives, change the red tape, and change the government disincentives against work, etc. And then we've got to change the government intrusion into the welfare space and into the charity space to allow room for private charities to actually flourish and function and have a purpose. There would have to be a transition period, but actually a lot of these things that we think the government has to do don't have to be done by government at all. They could be done much better by the private sector, but that's a hard sell. That's, again, the politician just has to go, oh, but I'll spend $100 million on this problem. And we all go, oh, fantastic. He's going to fix this problem, and forget that it's our money in the first place and that it probably won't fix the problem. But because we no longer bear responsibility, it becomes a very attractive proposition.
I think, too, that the regulatory framework for which libertarianism really espouses is it would mean a much smaller government. And I think there's a lot of people in big government that probably don't really like that idea. Topher, there's so many things I'd love to talk to you about, but time is against us. I'm hoping you'll come back and talk to us another time. But for the time being, tell people where they can find you online. There's a lot of work that you've done. You're also a filmmaker. Where can people find you online?
Sure. So at Topher Field across all the socials, I'm most active on Facebook and on X, although I will be getting much more active on YouTube soon. Around about a month's time, you'll see a lot more there. If you haven't seen my documentary Battleground Melbourne, go to battlegroundmelbourne.com. You can watch it for free. If you're not aware of my book, Good People Break Bad Laws, you can buy that and other T-shirts and things like that. This is Don't Make Me Repeat Myself, and it's being said by history. So I've got a whole bunch of sort of merch and stuff like that. You can find all of that at goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com.
Fantastic. Topher Field, so good to have you on the show, and we'll talk to you again another time soon.
A pleasure, Steve. Thanks.
And it is now! It is in this moment as his grubby hands are reaching for total power that we finally understand freedom, and we will not give it up without a fight.
Oh, that speech, I tell you what, it still gives me goosebumps. I tell you what, if you put a search term into YouTube, you can find that in its entirety. Just look for Topher Field speeches and it'll come right up there. And that was a rally that had close on 500,000 people at it. It was really quite desperation times by that point in all the lockdowns here in Melbourne. So, and of course, now you may not agree with some of the things Topher says, and he does tend to stir up some emotions particularly in the online community, and that's okay too. It's okay to have divergent views. That's what mature discourse is all about, and that's certainly what we encourage here on this show. So feel free to contact me if you want. I'd love to hear your views. Coming up after the break, we'll be talking to Josh Wood about getting rid of those COVID kilos.
You're listening to The Clear Signal.
It's great to have you back with us for this second half hour of The Clear Signal. Now, I know we've talked a lot this week already about all things COVID and lockdowns, and it all gets pretty heavy, and we're talking all the nasty side of it, like politics and all of that stuff. So let's get away from that a bit and perhaps look a bit more on the human level. And I guess, let's face it, I think during that time, most of us packed on an extra kilo or 3 or more during that time. And, well, it's been a few years now, I know that, but frankly, and speaking from experience, I can tell you, it's a bit of a struggle to shed them. I guess more generally too, it's a pretty indulgent age we live in, isn't it? And it's pretty easy to be lazy if you so choose, and it's not hard to stack those kilos on if you're not careful. So how do you turn it around? I've been struggling with that a lot myself, I don't mind telling you. Josh Wood is a health and fitness professional, and he's the owner of a very successful online coaching business called Strong for Life. G'day, Josh. Welcome.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you with us, mate. I'm really looking forward today to talking about some issues around health and fitness, but you're based down in Tasmania, but I see from your accent and I read from your bio that you're not actually a native of Tasmania, or at least not originally.
Yeah, no, sir. I live in Hobart now, but I grew up in Minnesota in the U.S.
It's a beautiful part of the world, land of 10,000 lakes, I think. Is that correct?
That's it.
Yeah. I used to live in Arkansas myself, so
yeah, okay.
That's another beautiful part of the world too. Actually, very similar to Tasmania. But anyway, we're not here to talk about geography. The fitness industry these days and the move to online, there's a lot of people doing what you do and doing it quite successfully. Have you seen an uptick in that, particularly since the COVID era and all the lockdowns?
Yeah, absolutely. The online coaching space is just growing, but it's growing faster than the public can catch up and understand what it is. From my experience, a lot of coaches are moving into the online space as quickly as possible because it's much more efficient in a lot of ways, but a lot of people still don't really understand how online coaching works.
Yeah. And I suppose that all comes around motivation. I suppose there's got to be a motivation from the individual to want to do this if you're going to be sitting here doing it in your lounge room or in your garage.
Yeah, there's absolutely an aspect of that where it comes down to motivation, but it's honestly probably easier to not have to leave your house or to go to where you normally go to the gym than it is to have to make a PT session somewhere in town, cross town, at a certain time of day. Yeah. Like it's a lot easier just to do it on your own time.
And I suppose too, one of the advantages if you're someone who doesn't like going into a gym environment, and let's face it, not everybody does, or even doing group sessions in your local park, some people would really, if you're not happy with the way you look or that sort of thing, then perhaps at least getting a kickstart doing it this way, this is, a really good way to do it.
Absolutely.
So tell me, what are some of the issues that you're seeing these days? I have a theory that everybody's, I don't think it's a theory. I think it's pretty obvious that since the lockdown era, everybody's fitness, I know mine has. I used to be reasonably fit, but over the years, getting into my 50s, and that pandemic certainly didn't help where we were sort of locked away, particularly here in Victoria. A lot of people have gotten very unfit and very unhealthy.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very real thing. I lived in Melbourne for about a decade, and I moved to Tasmania in 2018. Been working down here in gyms. I've been working in gyms my whole life. And down here, once we opened our borders, I got a pretty big influx of what I call Melbourne refugees. All the folks from Melbourne who were locked up for a year and were like, well, I'm not doing this anymore. And they bounced down here. And there was a big influx of people in the industry who were just people who were like, I've been locked up working from home. I've never done that before. All I could do is order Uber Eats. And they just put on a ton of weight, got out of shape, got sick, and they just feel terrible.
Yeah. And I think that's certainly I can speak from personal experience. And I actually ended up last year having open heart surgery, and I that was probably a long time coming from me, I suppose, when I think back. But I certainly think that era where you couldn't go anywhere and couldn't do a lot of exercise, and I think over time too, there just became a real psyche around it where you just didn't want to exercise, didn't want to do anything really. I'm sure that played into it, but I'm sure that's not a unique story either.
No, it's not. It's happened. Well, I mean, aside from being locked in your house for 2 years, it happens to people all the time. You lose momentum. This is like this sedentary inertia where people stop doing whatever activities they used to do because they get caught up with something else, whether it's family or work. And the longer you do that, the harder it is to get back into those habits. You just lose that momentum, and it's really hard to get that back, or it's really hard to start up in the first place. But once you get that momentum, everything just becomes a lot easier, which is why we don't want to lose it once we've got it.
Yeah. And I mean, what's the secret to, is there a secret? How do you unlock that motivation in someone? I guess that's very personal to every individual person.
That's absolutely right. So the biggest thing that I always look at before taking anybody on board is we have to understand what their why is. And, everybody's like, oh, I want to get fit. I want to lose some weight. And I go, okay, well, why? What does fitness even mean to you? And we dig into that and we just keep asking why until we get to that nugget. And it's like, well, I want to be able to play with my kids and not be out of breath. I want to be able to go to the playground and use the monkey bars with them and not be embarrassed. I had a guy I spoke to a couple weeks back who's like, my kid's 15 and he's like a super athlete now, and I don't want him to embarrass me by beating me and everything anymore. I'm like, perfect.
Pretty legit.
We can leverage that, but you got to find like this real deep understanding of why it actually is important, because quote unquote fit doesn't really mean anything. You have to dig into what that actually means to you personally.
And do you think a lot of people really focus on numbers like I am, X amount of kilos and I need to get down to this X amount of kilos and that'll mean I'm fit? But I don't know that that's really always the case. It's probably a factor in it, but it's not everything, is it?
If I'm being honest, I find that most of the women I work with start there. Most of the men less so. They more like want to do something. They want to see an outcome that is physical, some sort of undertaking. Like I used to be able to bench this much in high school. I want to do that again. But there's almost always a factor of numbers. And I do take numbers with everyone I work with because it's just another metric for us to measure over time to see how you're trending, or whether that's weight, or whether it's waist measurements or, hip measurements, VO2 max, step counts, like all these numbers all have a story to tell. So I like to take lots of numbers across a long period of time to see how we can measure progress in the most useful way for that individual.
I suppose it's the easiest way to quantify progress, isn't it? I know I've been doing a lot of walking in my recovery phase, and numbers, it really did become a numbers game there, but it was more in how many kilometres can I walk in a day and try to improve it that way, rather than saying, well, today I weigh this much and, next week I have to weigh this much. It was more about, other numbers.
Yeah. There's so many different numbers you can take. Weight is just usually the most common one people are either really invested in or really averse to. A lot of people are afraid of looking at the scales, and that's because there's an emotional attachment to what those numbers mean to them.
And the role of nutrition, I suppose that's something that I wonder if people really look at that as much as, some people, a lot of people I know will hit the gym really hard and, but then you'll see them eating food that you sort of got to really wonder, is that really the most healthy thing you should be eating if you're really fit? I mean, I suppose if it makes them happy, but nutrition is a huge thing that sometimes gets neglected, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of ways to go about it. There are different systems that will work for different people. I'm not into most of the fads because they all kind of break down to calories and macros and that kind of thing anyway. But there is a way of looking at food that is for optimal health, and a way of looking at food that is for performance, and a way of looking at food that is all about aesthetics. How is it going to make you look? And sometimes those don't overlap, and sometimes they do. It's just about figuring out what that goal is that you want to achieve and putting the right plan in place for it.
Yeah, and I see you have here on your website a section called Eat Like an Adult. What does that actually mean?
That's funny because I'm doing a TED Talk on that in May when we have TEDx Hobart here. And basically, eating like an adult is learning to understand how to make conscious choices, and that the decisions that you make reflect in the future you get to have. So when you make choices that bring about the future that you want, you're eating like an adult. And when you make choices that don't bring about that future, you acknowledge it and say, well, this is why I chose to do it. Maybe I just really love this food. It doesn't help me get that vibrant, fit, and capable future I want, but damn, it was good. And that's fine too. But being an adult means understanding the choices you make and understanding there are always consequences, and knowing that you have a decision every time you put something in your mouth.
That is key, isn't it? Everything is about choice. And it doesn't really even matter about food. It could be anything, but it's, I know when it comes to this, it's about choice. And even getting fit, that's a personal choice too. And I think you have to get to a point where you're like, I have to do something. I want to do something.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Clear Signal.
You're listening to The Clear Signal with me, Steve Visscher. It's great to have you along with us this week. And we're talking to health and fitness and nutrition expert Josh Wood about getting rid of some of those COVID kilos and, just living a bit smarter, I guess. Josh, we were talking just before that Hunters and Collectors track there about, the idea of making a choice about what you put in your mouth. And, there are all sorts of different choices we can make there, some better than others. But one of the things I noticed that's, very prevalent these days is diet shakes. And I've got to tell you, I'm one of those guys. I think I've tried them all. I got to wonder, I see a lot of marketing going on around that sort of stuff. Does that sort of stuff, is it really effective, or is that something you'd regard as a short-term fix? Or is it even a fix at all?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like I'm not big on a lot of supplements. I'm pretty much whole food based, but there's a time and place for most things. And there's a lot of, you call them diet shakes, protein shakes, meal replacement shakes. When it comes to reducing your total food intake, because the number one issue that people have is being overweight, having excess fat mass. Just this month, I think it was on the 14th of this month, the Lancet published a paper that showed that obesity has become a greater risk to worldwide public health than hunger. Like, being overweight is the number one issue right now for health worldwide. And so anything that allows us to get the nutrients we need and fuel ourselves for the things that we want to undertake in life while helping us lose weight by reducing the total calorie intake, that's probably a good thing. Even if it's just a short-term fix, once that weight's off, it's easier to maintain.
Yeah, and again, it's all about discipline. You use an interesting word there, fuel. I do a lot of reading, and I read a lot of stuff from military people, and I particularly special forces people, in fact, where they talk a lot about food, regardless of what it is, being exactly that. It's a fuel, and that's the way a lot of people in at least in that sort of line of work sort of think of it. But that's really true. It is fuel, no matter how much we enjoy it.
That's right, absolutely, and that's the way I try to reframe it for people. It's like, okay, what do you want to achieve? All right, so this is what we need to do to get there. And you need to fuel yourself for that. And so I take a very additive approach to nutrition where it's like, all right, let's add in all the things you need to have as opposed to just removing things you don't need. And what you find very quickly is that not only do you start to feel better, you stop eating a lot of the crap because there's no more space.
One of the things that I find interesting when you really start looking into food is particularly processed food is everything's got sugar in it. And, a lot of people, I have cardiologists now telling me to avoid sugar in my diet. I think people would really be surprised where sugar finds its way in. It's everywhere. How do you avoid that? Is it just a matter of, you talk there about whole foods. I mean, is that really where we should all be looking?
Well, yeah, we should absolutely be looking to whole foods first. Like there's no one got fat and sick from eating fruit. Apples never caused the obesity epidemic. It's the stuff in packages. And I'm not against anything in packages. I eat a lot of protein bars and simple packaged things because I can keep it in my desk all day. And sometimes I just need to grab something to fuel myself. But ultimately, like if you get out of the packaged aisles of the grocery store and you stick to whole foods, sugar's never a problem.
Is there any particular foods, like when you talk about whole foods, you talk about fruit there. I actually started eating a lot more fruit these days myself. It's something I've actually never really partaken in a lot. Is there's sort of different types of fruits and vegetables that you'd recommend?
You know what? Whatever ones you like. They're all going to be good in different ways. One thing I'm a huge fan of is apples. And the number one habit that I like to work with people on in my Eat Like an Adult guide is the apple test. Because so many people find themselves digging around in their desk and looking in the pantry because they feel like they're starving, but they're not. They just have a sugar craving or they just have some emotional response. They need to feed themselves. And so we go, okay, well, are you hungry? If you're hungry, eat an apple or a banana, whatever fruit. Apples are simple, but eat an apple. Would you eat an apple? If you're like, no, I don't really want to eat an apple. I just want to eat chocolate. It's like, okay, you're not hungry. You're medicating yourself with sugar.
Yeah.
So now you get to make a choice. Now you have a decision to make. So you break that reflexive behavior. You put a stop in it and you say, wait, am I actually hungry? Would I eat a piece of fruit? Do I want something sweet or do I want the sugar hit? Could I eat fruit instead? And then if they say, well, yeah, I'd eat the fruit, then eat the fruit. No worries. And just break that process down so that they have an opportunity to stop, think, and make a decision.
Yeah, it's really emotional. It's an emotional thing, like you say, isn't it? I think that's kind of understated a lot of times. I don't think people really, or people eat out of habit, or people eat if they're emotional.
Yeah,
that's actually a really good point. Yeah, I suppose you're in the best part of the world when it's talking about apples being down there in Tasmania. You're in the apple aisle after all.
Yeah, we're a little spoiled for choice when it comes to apples.
So, Josh, if you're somebody who's been out of shape for a long time and they're looking around, what would be something you could recommend to them before they even go into a program such as yours? I mean, is there steps people can take that might help them with that decision-making process to, gee whiz, I've been sitting around and I've been thinking about this for months. Yep. What's something that someone can do just to start getting into the right mindset, would you think?
Specific to those people looking to take up activity, whether it's working out at home or the gym or whatever, like I have created what I call my beginner gym guide, which goes through all the steps of how to get started, what you need to be thinking about, how to get your stuff together, what you need to look for in a gym, that kind of thing. But if you're just looking to do it on your own, just start walking. The first thing I start so many people out with is you need to walk 30 minutes a day, minimum. And people go, well, I don't have 30 minutes. It's like, you got 10 minutes after every meal. If you don't, cut your meals 10 minutes short, go for a walk. You walk 10 minutes after every meal. That's 30 minutes a day. That's 3.5 hours a week. That's a lot. That's a huge step.
Yeah.
And that's how you add up. And I call this working with TNT, tiny noticeable things. It's these little tiny things we stack up each day that make all the big difference in the long run, because it's TNT that moves mountains. And we've all got mountains in our life, things that we have to overcome and challenge we have to overcome. And it just starts with the little things, TNT.
So tell me now, I look around online and I spend a lot of time on places like Instagram. There are a lot of people doing online training. You said that's an industry that's really growing. Are you seeing more and more people coming to you now through social media presence? Is that really a key way of getting around things these days? I see so many of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of my business is through social media, mostly through Instagram. It has been for a very long time, even when I worked in gyms and I just had a local following. But social media is really driving that. And I think a lot of coaches are moving in that direction, but a lot of them are doing it from the view of trying to become a famous influencer as opposed to speaking directly to the people who they're actually supposed to be helping.
And so that really does become a case of buyer beware, or most of the point is just to making sure that you do your research and make sure that the person that you're looking at to help you with your fitness journey is somebody that's really doing it for the right reasons. And let's face it, that's got to be all about you and not so much about them, as Josh suggests there. Josh, if people want to find you online and check out your programs, where should they head?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Coach Josh Wood. If you're a website person, I've got a bunch of free resources, how to eat like an adult, how to get started in the gym for the first time, some free workouts on my website, which is just strongforlife.online.
Fantastic. You know what, Josh? I might even have a look at that myself when we finished here. Josh Wood, so good to have you with us. So will you come back and talk to us again in the future?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Talk to you again soon. Well, we've covered some interesting ground today, haven't we? I tell you what, some of the things that Josh talks about there, it just makes common sense, doesn't it? And sometimes I wonder why myself I don't seem to be able to pull it off, and I'm sure many of you feel the same. So make sure you check out Josh's website and really look him up and see if he can help you out if looking to live a bit smarter and a bit healthier is something that you're looking to do. So thanks to Josh for joining us. Thanks also to Topher Field for joining us. Great discussion there about politics and all sorts of things going around there. Coming up next week, we're going to be talking photography, and particularly mobile phone photography. I think all of us think we're a bit of a closet shutterbug these days with these fancy phones and all these cameras, and they're pretty capable these days. But, there's all sorts of things about composing it and setting it up right. So we're going to be talking to professional photographer Stephen Pam next week about that. That's next week on The Clear Signal. Have a great week, folks. Until I talk to you again, stay safe, enjoy life, and we'll see you soon.
Get in touch. Join the conversation. Find us online at clearsignal.com.au.